My name is Muhammad Shafiq. I'm at Nazareth College, the Hickey Center for Interfaith Studies and Dialogue, and the IIIT chair for the Interfaith Studies also. And I'm professor at, many of you are familiar with me for my long years in Rochester, but just a little bit. Professor at the Religious Studies. You know, what bothers me a lot, looking our ideal, the American pluralism, that very dream that we had, and we still have, and we cherish that dream. What is bothering me is that the religious, cultural, and racial hatred and divide is challenging that American dream. You know, more what it bothers me that today in our country, I'm not talking about the rest of the world, civic and religious dialogue is almost becoming impossible. Think about this, how things are happening in our country. I have deeply thought about that. What could be the reason about why this is happening in our country? I actually think about unilateral way of educating our next generation. And by that, I mean that in our education system is lacking diversity, equity, and inclusive dialogue. Our diversity, equity, and inclusive curriculum, and therefore our graduates don't have that vision of embracing the world. If you may, I mean, just to be very brief, you have known Dr. Breuman for that, how much he was committed to the diversity education by bringing the interfaith, both chair and the center, into Nazareth College. To be very brief, I'm really very pleased that our new president is not only on that path of DE and I education, but taking further steps actually to blend professional and DE diversity, equity, and inclusive education together. The goal is, what I hear our new president, Dr. Paul, that the dream is to have our graduates professionally trained and prepared because of the blend of this education, which we developing curricular and co-curricular activities in a way to professionally educate our students, but at the same time to be well aware, to be trained in DE and I education, to serve our world with openness, with respect and dignity. I think that's what is needed. You know, I worked in the race commission, other issues which I teach civil rights courses. When I look into the problem, whether it's police abuse and other things, which you see, I feel that we have not yet embraced fully one another. Taking further time, I'm really pleased that our new president, Dr. Beth Paul, has signed into it, and she's present among us. I would like her to say a few words of her vision, how she would like to see the world and especially our own country and the world, how we can live together in peaceful coexistence. Dr. Beth Paul.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shafiq. I really appreciate the invitation to be with you all this evening. And I also welcome Dr. Calabria to our community. I'm delighted that you are joining tonight and helping us all to think. And I agree with you, Dr. Shafiq. We are in I think, a direly critical time in our society, in our humanity. And I think about that all the time. And I am very glad that I am in a learning community that is Nazareth College, that is mindful of where we are in the world and is actively mindful in thinking about what our role is in helping our world to move in, I hope, a more peaceful and thoughtful direction. So I have, since you invited me to make some comments, I've been reflecting on this term exclusivity, and it's an interesting term. I think we often associate exclusivity with things of value, things we assign, value to, and therefore they should be desired. They should be desired more than other things. And the more exclusive something is, the more valued it is. And I find it very disconcerting that this is increasingly being applied to people too. And it is so laden with fear and creating what I think is a deeply divided and divisive society. And that is very concerning to us all, I know. Well, at NAS, what we try to do is we are very intentional about making a shift from a dominant mode of education that has been exclusive to very deliberately being inclusive in this education. And so I think a lot about what that means. What does that call us to do that is different from what really mostly very exclusive education has been doing? And I think, Professor Shafiq, you are so perceptive in terms of the power of that intersection between a liberal arts education and a professional education. We need people who have the freedom, the freeing of the mind that a liberal arts education helps to inspire, and then apply that in ways that will make a direct impact on our world. And I think that's what we try to do. This freeing of the world, of our mind, the freeing of our students to explore self-beliefs, to explore a whole array of beliefs, to be curious, to grow beliefs, to receive inspiration for holding the value of a whole array of beliefs and perspectives, and to realize, in fact, the power and the beauty of a whole array of beliefs and perspectives. Because you and I know that if we don't do this, we are actually very much limiting our students' learning, and we're very much limiting the power of humanity. We're very much limiting how we can all work together to move forward. So I'm very honored to be part of a learning community that takes this call to being inclusive, to forming an inclusive education, an inclusive curiosity, an inclusive conversation. I'm very honored to be part of a community that takes this commitment so seriously and does instill in our students, and I see the power in this, a belief that we have a beautiful humanity, and beautiful humanity comes in all sorts of forms. And there are so many different beliefs and so many different identities, social identities, positionalities, so many experiences, so many life journeys. And from them, life is enriched, and we learn in so many different ways. And as you know, our world is complex. Our world is very messy right now. And I believe it takes all of this. It takes the full beauty of humanity to be inclusive in helping us to think about how we create positive change in that world. So I thank you for giving me an opportunity to reflect and to think about what distinguishes the Nazareth College community. You are such a brilliant example of that, Dr. Shafiq, and I am honored to work with you. So welcome all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Paul, and thank you, Dr. Shafiq. And good evening, everyone. My name is Kamal Chappelle. I'm a sophomore student here at Nazareth College studying biology. This is my third semester working at the Hickey Center as a student worker. Our mission at the Hickey Center and the International Institute of Islamic Thought, or IIIT Chair for Interfaith Studies, is to promote understanding and appreciation of differences through education and dialogue. We do this through seminars and student engagement events and gatherings open to the public. The Hickey Center also prepares its students for the future by encouraging an interfaith education. We are beyond happy and ecstatic to welcome Dr. Michael Calabria, OFM, to Nazareth College this evening to speak with us about religious exclusivism. We ask to keep yourself on mute during this presentation and submit any questions you have for Dr. Calabria through the chat box. I now ask Nate Anderson, a colleague of mine, to take the mic.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. And we would just like to welcome Dr. Calabria and just be attentive to what he's saying. And like Kamal just said, feel free to place your comments in the chat box, but we'd like you to be able to keep your mics muted throughout the presentation. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. I'm Patricia Lapel. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Hickey Center. I've been here, well, throughout the entire pandemic and then a little bit before then. I'm so happy to welcome Father Michael to Nazareth College. Dr. Michael Calabria, OFM, is a Franciscan priest and a professor at St Bonaventure University. He has traveled extensively in the Islamic world, conducting research in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Oman, Turkey, and India. Father Michael is known around the world for his work in Christian-Muslim interfaith relations, and he regularly lectures on aspects of Abrahamic religions, including the Quran and Sufism, within Islam. Please help me welcome Dr. Calabria to Nazareth College.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for your wisdom and for your vision. And thank you, Dr. Shafiq, for your kind invitation and this opportunity to speak with all of you on the subject of religious pluralism. The title of my presentation, as you see, is Revisioning the Visionaries, Pushing Back on Religious Pluralism. Religious pluralism is a term that provokes a variety of reactions, both positive and negative. Part of the problem is that the term is used differently. It means different things to different people and is understood in various ways. So I want to begin my presentation this evening. If I can move my screen, there we go. I want to begin my presentation by clarifying what I mean by religious pluralism. As I use the term, religious pluralism is the belief that knowledge of the divine, that is truth, transcends all religious traditions, but is manifested in and by all of them in some form. Religions are not all the same, but each has something unique to offer its adherents and can provide fulfillment, salvation, enlightenment to its adherents if the religion is lived and practiced authentically. Religious pluralism is sometimes regarded as a form of religious perennialism, which maintains that there is a universal core of wisdom underlying all religious traditions. Perennialism has been espoused in different ways by people such as René Guénon, Ananda Kumaraswamy, Aldous Huxley, Fridtjof Schuon, Houston Smith, Syed Hossein Nasr, and many other notable authors and scholars. As I have defined it, religious pluralism is the antithesis of religious exclusivism, which maintains that one's own religion is the only true faith and the only one through which one can find fulfillment or salvation. Religious pluralism also moves beyond religious inclusivism, which holds that while other religions contain the seeds or elements or some reflection of the truth, one's own religion is still the fullest expression of that truth and possesses the greatest means for securing salvation or enlightenment, however defined. That would be the mainstream Catholic position, for example, as articulated by the Second Vatican Council, particularly by the documents Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium. There are, it should be said, Catholic theologians such as Roger Haidt, who have articulated what we would identify as a more pluralistic theology. Religious pluralism is often feared, disparaged, and rejected by religious conservatives as a kind of anything goes approach, and is seen as a manifestation of social and political liberalism, relativism, and secularism, or even a kind of cultural imperialism. Tonight, I will be focusing on what I believe is a concerted pushback against religious pluralism, back towards exclusivism, a trend that may be another form of tribalism or religious nationalism that we now see globally and involving most of the world's religious communities. I want to begin with some recent examples from the Catholic Church that have come to my attention. In February of this year, that is 2021, the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of Sacraments that oversees liturgical practices in the Roman Catholic Church issued an order to change the English translation of the Collect, a short prayer that concludes the opening rites of the Mass. Ever since 1973, this prayer has ended. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. That should be familiar to some of you. I've always appreciated this formulation, which, while referencing the Trinity, nevertheless maintains the oneness of God. I've always thought it to be a good expression of the foundational doctrine of the Abrahamic faiths, the belief in one God, the God of Abraham, of Isaac and Ishmael, the God of Moses, of Jesus, the God of Muhammad. The February declaration by the Congregation for Divine Worship directed presiding priest to drop the word one from the prayer. It was argued that it was more consistent with the Latin text and better expressed the prayer that is made to Christ as God incarnate. However, you may appreciate the theological finesse of this declaration, but there is a hidden agenda here. The directive indicated that the cardinal prefect has pointed out the importance of affirming this Christological truth amid the religious pluralism of today's world. There it is. The real issue behind this directive is religious pluralism, which is a current Catholic code word that generally refers to Islam and its growing presence and influence. Of course, Islam maintains a fundamental belief in the oneness of God, and the language of the Catholic prayer, one God forever and ever, was sounding a little too Islamic for the cardinal prefect, Robert Sarah. Robert Sarah has made negative remarks about Muslims on several occasions. In stark and startling contrast to Pope Francis's wishes, Cardinal Sarah has opposed receiving Muslim refugees in Europe and fears an Islamic conquest of the Western world. This Ghanaian cardinal has remarked, "My country is predominantly Muslim. I think I know what reality I'm talking about." I would remind the cardinal that Islam was established in Guinea by Musa I, the African king of Mali, several centuries before Roman Catholicism was introduced by Portuguese invaders seeking gold and slaves. Moreover, Cardinal Sarah fears that if Europe does not maintain cultural and religious homogeneity, Islam will invade the world and we will completely change culture, anthropology, and moral vision. Cardinal Sarah has been a longtime friend and colleague of former Pope Benedict XVI, who shares his concerns about religious pluralism as a form of relativism. Before his election as Pope, Benedict, then Cardinal Ratzinger, was responsible for censuring the Jesuit theologian Jacques Dupuy in 2001 for his book Toward a Christian Theology of Religious Pluralism. That notification against Dupuy's book bluntly stated, quote, that the followers of other religions are oriented to the church and are all called to become part of her. It should be noted that soon after Cardinal Sarah issued his directive regarding the collect in February 2021, Pope Francis received his resignation. Cardinal Sarah's fears about Muslims and religious pluralism are not shared by Pope Francis. You will recall that in February 2019, Pope Francis and Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, signed the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. In that document, the two leaders stated, the pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in his wisdom through which he created human beings. The idea of religious diversity as willed by God is explicitly mentioned in the Quran. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, we read, to every one of you, we have made a law and a way. And if God had so willed, surely he could have made you all into one community. So vie with one another in doing good works. You will return to God all together, and he will explain to you those things in which you differed. Some Catholic theologians went wild, however, when the text of the document was released. How could God will that people be adherents of faith traditions deemed to be deficient and incomplete, if not in outright error? And so it was explained that God has two wills, active and permissive. Whereas God actively wills Catholicism as the true religion, he only permissively wills the existence of other religions as a preparation for professing the Catholic faith. Such a conceptual bifurcation of God's will only reveals a church still wrestling with religious pluralism in the world, 2/3 of which does not embrace Christianity, and which is happy to profess Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and many other faith traditions. Catholic conservatives are not the only ones pushing back against ideas of religious pluralism, however. The same phenomenon can be found in any community that makes exclusive claims about being the only means of salvation or enlightenment. Academics are not immune from this retreat into exclusivism, although the reasons for their stances are not always apparent or easy to identify. For the remainder of my presentation, I would like to talk to you about three visionaries, three people of profound spiritual depth who, although quite orthodox in many ways according to the standards of their time, nevertheless saw the potential of their faiths to include the religious other in God's plan of salvation rather than exclude them. The three visionaries are Francis of Assisi, the Sufi Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, and the Algerian resistance leader, Amir Abdelkader al-Jazairi. All three lived in times when religious exclusivism was the norm, but each, I believe, made an opening in that veil that separated people of faith, an opening that later allowed for more inclusive attitudes to emerge and ultimately more pluralistic positions. These three continue to serve as inspiration to all who endeavor to foster not merely toleration for the other, but respect and reverence. Now, I'm not claiming that these individuals were religious pluralists. They were not according to our contemporary understanding, although they are often evoked as such. I have selected these three individuals particularly because each has recently been the subject of scholarly monographs that could be described as revisionist, as their authors attempt to revision their subjects, that is, to pull them back from the realm of religious pluralism in order to reclaim them for one religious community only, Catholicism or Islam specifically in these cases. Each author has his own motivation for writing. They're all male, and I'm not impugning their scholarship per se. They are all indeed fine and erudite scholars, and they all make necessary correctives to the narratives of their subjects. I will, however, suggest that their perspectives and interpretations are perhaps motivated or influenced by or are expressions of the contemporary pushback against religious pluralism that is occurring in all religious communities, as well as within the allegedly more objective world of academia. Our first visionary is Francis of Assisi. It was not by chance that Pope Francis and Ahmed el-Tayyib signed the document on human fraternity in 2019, for this is the year in which Franciscan and Muslim communities around the world marked the 800th anniversary of the encounter between Francis of Assisi and the Ayyubid Sultan al-Malik al-Kamil in 1219. In recent decades, the story of Francis and the Sultan has become increasingly known through the fine scholarship of people like Jan Herberix, Guenole Jusset, Michael Cusato, and the popular account written by Paul Moses. Time does not permit me to go into detail about the historical context for the encounter. Although the content of their conversation is unknown, we can be certain of what Francis did not say. In spite of his own convictions about his Christian faith, he apparently did not disparage Islam or its prophet, such as was the common strategy for Christian missionaries of his day, a suicidal strategy that resulted in the death of Franciscan friars in Morocco in 1220. Although all medieval chronicles of Francis's encounter with the Sultan must be treated with suspicion due to their hagiographical intent and purpose, the earliest accounts written by Jacques de Vitry, the Bishop of Acre, who was with the crusade in Egypt, tell us that the Sultan willingly listened to Francis preach, was a gracious host, and that he asked Francis to pray for him. This could only have been the case if Francis had refrained from attacking the Sultan's faith. Indeed, after leaving Egypt, Francis wrote his rule for the friars, which included a chapter that dealt specifically with those friars who desired to become missionaries in Muslim lands. Francis admonished his brothers not to engage in arguments or disputes, but be subject to every human creature for God's sake, even though he regarded baptism as necessary for salvation. Francis's abhorrence of disputes, particularly when concerned with faith, echoes what is written in the Quran. Do not argue with the peoples of the book, save in a most virtuous manner, except those among them who act unjustly. But say to them, we believe in that which has been revealed to us and to you, and our God and your God is one, and to him do we submit. Yet Francis's peaceful and non-confrontational approach to preaching the gospel and his submission before Muslim authority was not to become standard or accepted policy for the friars. The rule was revised and rewritten in 1223, certainly not by Francis. Instead of the friars being subject to every human creature for God's sake, as Francis had written, and that meant including Muslims, all friars were to be subject to the Holy Church, said the later rule. All admonitions against disputing with the non-believers were excised from the rule. Moreover, the official narrative of Francis's encounter with the Sultan, and thereafter the only permitted version, was that written by Bonaventure of Bonareggio as part of his major legend of St. Francis. In Bonaventure's account, the encounter between Francis and the Sultan becomes a religious confrontation, with Francis challenging the Sultan and his religious advisors to a trial by fire. This is the only version that friars would actually know into the 20th century. It is Francis's original vision of peaceful and respectful engagement with Muslims that formed the foundation for the contemporary model of Franciscan mission. This is articulated by the General Constitutions of 1988. The constitutions indicate that the brothers should undertake a study of world religions and cultures with, quote, a sense of great reverence, end quote. The friars are exhorted to work with believers of other religions with, quote, a kind and reverential presence among them, and are to show great reverence for the consciences of all. The repeated use of the word reverence connotes an encounter with the divine in the religious other, such as St. Francis seems to have experienced in the Sultan El-Kamil. Now for the revision. In 2009, John Tolan, a scholar of Christian-Muslim relations in the medieval period, published his book on the Francis-Sultan encounter. In his final chapter, Francis, Apostle of Peace, Tolan completely rejects and refutes the image of Francis as the peaceful preacher who submitted himself in respect and reverence before the Sultan. He apparently agrees with the Italian journalist Vittorio Messori, whom he quotes. When asked if St. Francis was a man of peace, Messori responded, absolutely not. Francis participated in the Fifth Crusade as a chaplain to the troops and not as a man of peace. These are Messori's words. He sought by all means to obtain martyrdom in order to reconquer the Holy Land and fell into a depression when the Crusaders lost. He did not go to see the Sultan to dialogue, but to convert him, and he defied him to walk on burning coals to see who was the more powerful, Christ or Muhammad. It's actually quite shocking that Tolan would quote Messori here, for the remarks are painfully unaware of the critical contemporary scholarship on the Franciscan sources. Yet Tolan does not correct Messori's views. He lets them stand unqualified, pushing back against pluralist views. The second visionary I'd like to address tonight is Ibn Arabi. He has been called a Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest sheikh or teacher of the Islamic mystical tradition, and was the author of some 700 works. Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. There are some connections between him and Francis, although none of them are direct. These men were both direct contemporaries in the late 12th and early 13th century. Both spent time in Egypt. Ibn Arabi was in Cairo in 1202 and 1206, that is in the decade preceding Francis's arrival in Damietta, when the Ayyubid Sultanate was ruled by Al-Adil, the father of Al-Malik El-Kamil. Undoubtedly, El-Kamil would have been familiar with the person and perspectives of Ibn Arabi, to some extent at least, since the sheikh was under his father's protection while in Egypt. The sheikh had been born and raised in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, then under the rule of the Almohad Caliphate. After some time in Morocco, Ibn Arabi headed east, passing through Egypt on his way to the holy city of Mecca. He traveled through the region during the time of the Fifth Crusade that had also brought Francis to Egypt. In 1223, he settled in Damascus at the invitation of Al-Kamil's brother Al-Muwazzam and died there in 1240. His tomb is located in the crypt of a small mosque on the slopes of Mount Qasiyun in Damascus. It was during his stay in Mecca in 1214 that Ibn Arabi wrote a collection of love poems called Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, the translator of desires. Ever since R.A. Nicholson's translation of the Tarjuman appeared in 1911, Ibn Arabi has been something of an icon for religious pluralism. This is due in part to the closing verses of the 11th poem in his collection. My heart can take on any form, a meadow for gazelles, a cloister for monks, a temple for idols, the Kaaba of the pilgrim, the tablets of the Torah, the book of the Quran. I profess the religion of love. Wherever its camels turn, there is my religion and my faith. This poem has been something of a creed for religious pluralists for over a century, reflecting a religion of love that embraces the creation and transcends all particular religions. According to Ibn Arabi, there is only oneness, existence, wujud in Arabic, God. Certainly, he writes, there is nothing in existence except God Most High, his attributes and his actions. Everything is he and of him and from him and to him. Diversity, in Ibn Arabi's view then, reflects the diversity of humanity and the infinite ways the one is manifested. Each belief about God, each conception of God is unique and reflects some aspect of the real, but is limited and must be transcended in order to achieve union, wisal, with the beloved. For decades, William Chittick has been the preeminent Western scholar of Ibn Arabi and addressed the issue of the Sheikh's writings and religious pluralism in his 1994 book, Imaginal Worlds, Ibn Arabi and the Problem of Religious Diversity. Some years later, in 1213, he wrote an article that specifically analyzed the verses I cited from the Tarjuman, because he felt they were being misappropriated. In short, Chittick shows that Ibn Arabi's religion of love is not some abstract notion of universal fraternity. The religion of love, according to Ibn Arabi, is in fact a reference to the faith of Islam, upholding the oneness of God preached and practiced by the prophets, which effectively leads the believer back to God, the true beloved, when lived and practiced according to the Sunnah, that is the example of the Prophet Muhammad. I don't believe Chittick was engaged in revisionism here, but actually much needed analysis and clarification. The revisioning of Ibn Arabi is actually provided by Gregory Lipton's 2018 book, Rethinking Ibn Arabi. Not content with Chittick's 2013 clarification, Lipton launches into an assault on Chittick's inclusivist or occasionally universalist interpretive framework, but even more stridently and extensively argues against the perennialist hermeneutics. We have some music here, and I'm not quite sure why. Thank you. Let me repeat. In his book, Lipton launches into an assault on Chittick's inclusivist or occasionally universalist interpretive framework, but even more so, he goes after the perennialist hermeneutics of Fritjof Schuon, René Guénon, Titus Burckhardt, Martin Lings, Said Hossein Nasser, Reza Shah Kazemi, Henry Corbin, and many others. In stark contrast to how the vast majority of scholars have presented Ibn Arabi's ideas, Lipton argues that the greatest sheikh has been appropriated imperially by perennialists seeking an ideal and irenic Muslim, when in fact Ibn Arabi was much more of an exclusivist and absolutist. Moreover, Lipton attempts to demonstrate that far from being a tolerant pluralist, Ibn Arabi supported discriminatory measures against Christians and Jews and disparaged their scriptures. Yet not unlike some of the scholars he criticizes, Lipton too is selective in what he uses as evidence to support his arguments. For example, he does cite this passage from Ibn Arabi's Bezel of Wisdom in order to argue against universalist interpretations, but he admits the portion I have underlined here, which would contradict his point. Beware, lest you bind yourself with a specific belief and reject others, for much good will escape you. Indeed, the knowledge of reality as it is will escape you. Be then within yourself the substance for all forms of belief, for God is too vast and too great to be confined to one belief, rather to the exclusion of another. And this is what Lipton omits. Ibn Arabi continues, for indeed, he, God, says, wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. This is quoted from the Holy Quran. God did not mention any particular direction. He states that there is the face of God, and the face of the thing is its reality. Moreover, Lipton entirely neglects lesser known works of Ibn Arabi, such as his short manual of spirituality, translated as What the Seeker Needs, in which the Sheikh wrote, look upon the whole creation and above all humanity with goodwill, accepting, approving, forgiving, serving, loving. Make that your nature in dealing with the world. That is, for every piece of evidence Lipton uses to prove Ibn Arabi's exclusivism, others find much to demonstrate Ibn Arabi's inclusivism and perhaps even pluralism. Until Ibn Arabi's vast corpus of writings are thoroughly analyzed, we must refrain from overgeneralizations in either direction. Whatever conclusions are drawn about Ibn Arabi, what cannot be refuted is that in subsequent generations, the greatest sheikh inspired countless disciples and numerous Sufi tariqas, such as the Shistis, Qadiris, Shatiris, Melamis, Jarahis, Bektashis, to name a few, all of whom developed inclusivist, pluralistic spiritualities based on the concept of wahdat al-wujud, the oneness of being. One of Ibn Arabi's disciples is my third and final example of a visionary being revisioned recently, Abd al-Qadir al-Jazairi. In 1830, a French armada of 600 ships headed for Algiers, carrying an army of 34,000 soldiers. As the French extended their control over the entire Algerian coast, Sidi Muhyiddin, descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and head of a Qadiri Sufi institution, called for a jihad to repel the invaders. His son Abd al-Qadir was selected commander of the faithful to lead the resistance, and he did so for 15 years before surrendering. Although the terms of the surrender included an assurance that he would be allowed to reside in Egypt, instead, Abd al-Qadir was taken to France and, with his family and companions, confined in a damp chateau for 5 years. In 1852, he was released from custody by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte on the provision that he would not return to Algeria. By 1855, he had settled in Damascus, which was then under Ottoman rule. In the summer of 1860, sectarian violence rocked Lebanon and Syria, including Damascus. French protectionism of Maronite Christians had stirred up anger and resentment among the Druze, who accused the Christians of collusion with European powers. For more than a week, mobs moved through the Christian quarters of Damascus, breaking into homes, burning them, and killing their inhabitants. They also attacked the consulates of France, Russia, the United States, and Greece. Only the residence of the British consul was spared, a sign that the violence was more politically based than actually religious. Abd al-Qadir and many of his armed followers acted swiftly to gather the city's Christians and shelter them at defensible locations, including his own home. It is said that he and his men rescued over 13,000 Christian lives. For his heroism and magnanimity, the government of France awarded him the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor. Likewise, he was honored by the governments of Russia, Great Britain, Greece, the Ottoman Empire, and the Vatican. And President Lincoln sent him a pair of inlaid pistols. In a letter to Monsignor Pavy, the Bishop of Algiers, Abd al-Qadir explained his actions during the days of carnage. The good we did towards Christians we had to do out of fidelity to the Muslim faith and to respect the rights of humanity. For all creatures belong to God's family, and the most beloved of God are those who are most useful to his family. As such, like his spiritual ancestor Ibn Arabi, Abd al-Qadir has been a beloved figure of religious pluralists and perennialists. In 2017, however, Tom Warner Powell undertook a revisionist study of this greatly beloved Amir. Like Gregory Lipton, Powell went on the offensive against perennialists, again, such as René Guénon, Friedhof Schuon, Martin Ling, and others, and even calls out Michel Chodkiewicz, whose interpretation of Ibn Arabi was lauded by Gregory Lipton. Unlike Lipton, however, Powell was not trying to claim that Abd al-Qadir was an anti-Christian exclusivist. He does argue, however, that the Orientalist, perennialist, or pluralist view about Abd al-Qadir, that he had undergone some kind of personal transformation while in France and went from warrior to pacifist or from theocrat to a postmodern pluralist, but this is flawed. Powell wants to see the Amir's actions, both the Algerian jihad and his beneficence towards the Christians of Damascus, as emanating from the same source, his deep and fervent Islamic faith. In this, I must agree with him for the most part, but I find his concerted attack on pluralism and perennialism as a curious element in his otherwise laudable reassessment of Abd al-Qadir. Moreover, Powell has avoided citing one of the most pluralist passages in the Amir's works, from his Kitab al-Mawaqif. He writes, "If you think and believe that he is what all schools of Islam profess and believe, he is that, and he is other than that. If you think that he is what the diverse communities believe, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Mazdians, polytheists, and others, he is that, and he is other than that. No one knows him in all his aspects. No one is ignorant of him in all his aspects." In these words, Abd al-Qadir shows himself as a true disciple of Ibn Arabi, and thus it is no surprise that the Amir was later buried next to the greatest sheikh in the mosque in Damascus. While it is clear that there is a very real pushback against religious pluralism from religious leaders and academics, what is less clear is why, and who is benefiting from such revisions of visionary figures. What is to be gained by revisioning such men? Is it simply academia, the rigors of academia that drives this revisionism? I think perhaps that as our communities, congregations, and countries become increasingly diverse, interconnected, and interdependent through the various channels of globalization, many people are feeling a loss of distinctiveness, and perhaps with it, a loss of power, prestige, and privilege, and a loss of those towering figures whose faith is now claimed by unbelieving others. In their mildest forms, such feelings and fears of loss may be expressed in exclusivist doctrines, sermons, and statements, practices, to reassert the superiority of one's own faith tradition over and against others. Exclusivist speech often conveys falsehoods, stereotypes, and prejudices. These, in turn, can lead to social injustices and marginalization. In its extreme form, religious exclusivism often results in sectarian violence in the world. According to a Pew Research study, in 2018, more than a quarter of the world's countries experienced a high incidence of violence motivated by religious hatred. This violence involves and affects many of the world's religious communities, including Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists. And some of this violence occurs within a religious group, such as Hindu violence against Dalits, or Sunni Shia conflicts, or Salafi violence against Sufis. Just this past Friday, as many as 100 Shiite Muslims were killed in a bombing at a mosque in Afghanistan. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the bombing and promised more attacks on Shiites around the world. In spite of such aberrations and the effort to push back against pluralism, I must conclude with Leonard Swindler that, quote, the trajectory of history clearly is ineluctably directed towards pluralism. In his 2013 book, Kenneth Ross observed that no single religion has been able to secure for itself universal assent that is final and normative for all humanity. And perhaps this is a good thing. Ultimately, what is needed when relating to the religious other is humility, not hostility. That's what the visionaries have taught us. Let's not distort their vision or our own. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Calabria. We really appreciate you going through of some of our visionaries who showed us the path for diversity and inclusion. The floor is open now for Q&A. Nathan, you want to say something before?
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Dr. Calabria. That was awesome. Great to hear from you. Now I want to invite anybody who wishes to type questions you may have for Dr. Calabria into the chat box, and our students will moderate the discussion. Due to the limited time, we'll only be able to answer a few of the questions this evening, but we wanted to say thank you, and we look forward to reading your questions.
I am just having a little bit of difficulty getting my menu bar back so I can actually click on the chat. Dr. Shafiq, can you field the questions for me? Because I am not able to get my control bar back so that I can see the chat.
The students are doing that. When the question comes, they will fill that in. Before, I don't see yet any question coming, so please write it down. The students will pick it up. But as you said, Dr. Calabria, about the issue of exclusivism. Once, I think it was quite a few years back, I was not in Nazareth College at that time. I was speaking in a place where there was a mixed gathering of some 200 people, Muslims and Christians. So you will find these exclusivists in almost in all traditions. So I was speaking and I saw there a person sitting. He was a Muslim, but a very exclusive. So he was, during my lecture in QA, he was raising his hand and I was not giving opportunity. After, when I said to the people, thank you for coming, all of that, he said, you heard Shafiq say, talking to you about Islam and interfaith. And then he said at the end, you will go to hell if you do not become Muslim. And what the people said, you are going to hell.
Oh my word.
I have to interfere again that how this language has helped anyone. This is a language which is highly divisive. And unfortunately, we have people in all religions. And their number is increasing now who sends people to hell and who are disrespectful. That respect which shall be given to humanity, they're disrespectful to that, So it's really, when I see such things in life, it really think about why we are so divided today, why there is such a hateful rhetoric these days. All right, any question which is coming up?
There is one question here from Abdul Khan asks, Ibn Arabi has been a very controversial figure in the Sunni Muslim world, so he should not be an authority. It would be the Prophet who is the authority. I think he's asking for clarification.
Yeah, I think Ibn Arabi would agree with that. We of course do have the authority of the Prophet, but there are also theologians who come after the prophets to help us understand the tradition in a full fashion. You cannot dispute that Ibn Arabi has been one of the most influential Islamic theologians for centuries. And the amount of material that he wrote and the teachings that he inspired have been tremendous. So, of course, the first line of authority is what has been revealed through the prophets, but we also have theologians after that, and Islam has a very rich tradition of theology and teachers. So Ibn Arabi is one of them, but many Muslims would agree that he is one of the greatest, if not the greatest. But I understand he was controversial in his own time and is controversial now. The question I would ask is, why is he controversial? But that's beyond our topic for tonight.
We've got another one here from Patrick B. Fox. He asks, how do you see the current emphasis on self, it's all about me and what I want, impacting efforts to be less divided and more seekers of inclusivity and interfaith dialogue?
Could you repeat that? I need to hear that again.
Yeah, for sure. It says, how do you see the current emphasis on self, quote, it's all about me and what I want, end quote, impacting efforts to be less divided and more seekers of inclusivity and interfaith dialogue?
That's a good question. That might be the subject of a whole seminar or course. The focus on the self, it's all about me. There are very few religious communities, I would say, that would endorse that kind of attitude. It's all about me. Our respective faith traditions, the world's major religious traditions, all call us beyond ourselves, into relationship with the other, and particularly, but not only, those who are marginalized, the poor, the vulnerable, etc. So I really feel that this all about me perspective is so antithetical to a life of integral faith. I think that's my response there.
You know, there was a person, I'm still waiting for another question to come. There was a person, I was in dialogue with that person. You know, and we were talking and the person is continuously saying that group will go to hell, that will go to hell, that will go to hell, including myself will go to hell. And finally I said, what you will do alone into heaven then? I don't want to say otherwise. I said, what you will do alone if all of them are going to hell, including, I mean, the person being a Christian talking to me, you know, thinking that other than this group, this particular group in Christianity, the rest of Christian, Muslim, and others, every human others will go to hell. And among that group also, he particularized some that they will be in the hell. So it's amazing to see how people look into religious exclusivism, and from religious exclusivism, how actually lead to violence and breaking of dialogue.
Indeed.
Another question coming?
Yes, we have a question from Alyssa Wynn, who asks for you to repeat the definition of prenatalism.
Of I'm sorry,
Perennialism.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Perennialism.
Oh, perennialism. Yes, perennialists believe that there is a core body of wisdom, divine truth that is at the heart of all of the world's religions.
We have another one in from Rich Kripe. It seems that religious beliefs are being shaped by political beliefs and vice versa. What's your thoughts on this?
I think that religion has historically, all religions are to a greater or lesser extent shaped by what's going on within the community or around the community. I think that no religion has ever been immune from social, political, economic forces that surrounded it. Of course, we're very conscious of that now in our own time, but look at the church in the time of Francis. There was no legitimate religious cause for the Fifth Crusade. Particularly when the Sultan, Al-Malik al-Kamil, actually offered Jerusalem to the Crusaders if they would simply leave his realm. But the Crusaders, the church actually, refused that. So there was another agenda there. So historically, we see politics involved very much with religion. It's up to each believer and authorities within religious communities to step back and say, we can't be about that because it's not really of our faith. But that takes some stepping back, it takes some objectivity, and it takes some serious self-reflection. Anything else that I could answer or comment on for people? Hello?
So Abdul Khan asks again, or comments, his comment about Adam being called insan and anthropomorphism, the likening Allah and his creation, and is a lie of falsehood. His belief that the idol worship of the people of Noah was valid and the kufr of disbelief. Anyone who says such a thing cannot be approved of. His comment that al-haq, which is transcendent, is the physical creation which you can see, is false and contradictory. And it is also kafir. His comment that the people of prophethood had reached the true state of closeness to Allah is a lie against Allah. And by saying this, he has rejected that Allah said about them.
Well, I thank you for your comment. It is a comment. Thank you.
Dr. Calabria, what gives you hope about our current state of religious exclusivity? You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like, oh.
Yeah, because there's a lot of bad news, right?
Yes.
But I actually think that all of these actions that speak of exclusivism are the death throes of it. I think that we cannot avoid moving towards a more pluralistic world in terms of religion. The reality is that no religion has ever been able to dominate the world and impose itself over all peoples everywhere for all time. That says something, I think. If we stopped and looked at human history, we would say, it looks like no one is ever going to make the world into a single religious community. And I don't actually think that's so bad. I think that we learn from one another. The Quran tells us this. The Quran says God created us created us as different peoples so that we might learn from one another. Diversity helps us learn about the world. If everyone is like me, if everyone believes the same thing, if everyone speaks the same language, if everyone does what I do, if everyone believes what I do, how could I possibly learn anything new? It's only when we come across something that is different from ourselves, people who think differently, who profess differently, who act differently, who dress differently, who love differently, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we learn. Now, it doesn't mean that we become the other,
Right.
but it means that we are able to learn from the other. And therefore, the more we learn from one another, the more we learn about our world. And quite frankly, the more we learn about our God, however we define that God. So I am optimistic, although, in the immediate present here, we are dealing with some rather extremist forms of exclusivism right here in our own country. We know that. But I think it's set up for failure. I really do. It's not what humanity is. We are, by our nature, diverse beings. Alhamdulillah, that's the way God created us.
I think there's no more questions.
Yeah, is there anyone who would like to make a comment or a question? And otherwise we can go towards concluding remarks. So, Dr. Calabria, you said rightly what I'm afraid, what is happening in our country. And when you look into third world countries also, in third world countries too, which, the word is third world countries, meaning the rest of the world, this exclusive tendency is making dialogue impossible. And that's why it is breaking the family, because if there is no dialogue, how the family can stay together? And it is breaking communities also. If there is no dialogue. So what is happening is that the places of worships are increasing because we cannot go along with one another. And not only that, the hateful rhetoric is increasing. So what ecumenical dialogue has done, when we look into the history of ecumenism, then we look into the history of Nostra Aetate, or we look into the interfaith dialogue in Spain, that's what brought prosperity later on. Because when communities dialogue, it becomes creative. I'm really thankful to you for speaking to us today on this very, very significant topic. I hope you can open up. In my teaching, the evaluation many times would say, I was not a good Catholic, but now I'm a good Catholic after learning about other religion. I was not a good Muslim, but now I'm a good Muslim about learning about other, meaning are a Jewish or other, meaning it opens your eyes to embrace others and to respect your own values and to respect your own thought. Thank you very much. I hope we can move towards that inclusivity and pluralism, appreciating and respecting all humanity altogether. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who are here and who could not make it, but they were trying to make it one way or another. We could not be here with us. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.
Thank you.
We have another coming on Juneteenth, on the 19th. Juneteenth will be on the 19th. And also, if you look into the Nazareth College calendar, there is one on Thursday on social justice. So there is quite a few programs which we are committed here at Nazareth College to make diversity is our top priority, believing that if we appreciate diversity, there will be better peace and coexistence. Thank you again, and please join us in our next programs. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.